Welcome back to the program this week, and we are talking about a country that you don't think I have the capacity to talk about, because I'm talking about Cambodia today. And I am having a guest today. Anirudh is actually an Indian who living in Cambodia, so it's quite interesting combination. And I think is, on the other hand, it's quite neutral, because he doesn't have many weird feeling or very local feelings about or actually seeing the things quite independent or expat. So, Anirudh, you're here.
Yes.
And I think Cambodia is quite interesting because I think the angle here is because seeing Cambodia is kind of, have the same prime minister for many years. So people are very directly think that they would assume that there might be some cover up. It's quite obvious. It's quite obvious conclusion or stereotype. But you don't think that is the case?
That is correct. Thank you, Jeremy, for having me on your show today. And there have been some people among the expatriate community who do think there is a cover-up, but I don't think that's the case, because while Cambodia has some way to go before it is considered a true democracy,
right?
There is a lot of a strong and vibrant press, which is still facing challenges, but at the same time, cover-ups of the style that happen in China are not possible here, mainly due to the free internet and the proliferation of mobile internet devices all over the country. It is virtually impossible for the government to cover up or suppress information. In fact, I think Cambodia is one country where the use of telecoms SIM cards the penetration is around 150%.
Okay.
And the use of smartphones is also very high in Cambodia.
So, but still, there is quite a reason that because Cambodia, the case in Cambodia is pretty low, consider the population and all kinds of things. So there's still a reason, and people will think that, well, is it really about the weather? Because there is an earlier theory, or at least this is still stands like probably 3 months ago, before Singapore has a serious outbreak. So people will still think, is there the tropic weather, the hot weather will make everything, will suppress the activity of virus, but it seems not true for the case in the Singapore. So what is your take on this?
Well, that's a really good point. I personally think this is a combination of factors.
Right.
And even if you take the case of Singapore,
right,
the population of which is around 5.6 million, right?
Yeah.
So that comes to the number of infected people in Singapore has been reported to be 57,000. That's around 1% of the population, out of which only 27 have died. So given the size of Singapore, which is around like half or a little less than half of that of Cambodia, the number of cases are still low in Singapore. And yes, I do think it likely has something to do with the hot weather in the region.
Right.
Plus, a bunch of factors like lack of use of air conditioning in most places in Cambodia. Cambodians like to spend time outdoors.
Right.
The relative age of the average age of a Cambodian is 25 years here, so I think they're a young and a hardy bunch.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think this is quite interesting point, because Cambodia, actually why the population is so young, because it's really about the history, because they quite have a serious civil war, even like that if you count the continuous of the civil war is actually up to 1993 if you count the history. So that is the background. I need to talk with my audience a little bit, right? So because not everyone is familiar with the country of the history of the country, so that is the case. So because they have the civil war, and then young actually at that time, because that is like 20 years ago. So when the people, the most strongest men died in the fighting. So suppose if if Cambodia didn't have a civil war at that time, then these people are exactly the people like at the 50s or 60s, and it's one of still. This one is still valid, but I'm not sure it will valid later. But it's still what we understand now is the most vulnerable people in this coronavirus.
Yes.
So why Cambodia is a little bit weird, or a little bit because they are actually, it's not every Southeast it's actually quite unique situation in Southeast Asia, because the 70s and 80s is in other countries, in other southeastern Asian countries, everyone is booming in economy, right? So that is I think it's a quite unique situation for Cambodia. So again, so Cambodians are actually quite hate to wear masks, is it?
I think they were, in the initial days when the first case of coronavirus surfaced in Cambodia, that was in January.
Right.
When a Chinese national was found to have been afflicted by the disease. And at that time, coronavirus was in the news 24 hours. So a lot of Cambodians were, in fact, voluntarily taking precautions. Despite the government not being too proactive initially, the people were already taking precautions on their own. You would see that the amount of traffic had decreased on the roads. People were spending more time indoors. But slowly, as the number of cases has stayed low, I think there is a sense of security. I don't know if this is a false sense of security or not, but it seems, for now, it seems like a very pretty stable situation in the country. We don't have many new cases coming up, and based on my personal experience, and this is anecdotal, you don't see a spurt in the number of funerals or hear news about a larger number of old people dying compared to last year. Right. So that hasn't been in the news.
Right. So I think one thing is let's talk about a little bit about yourself, because last time you talked with me, you probably go through some symptoms and you actually you went to take a test. So how is the experience with the Cambodian authority?
Yeah, I felt like I was somewhat sick in March, and I had a low-grade fever. Right. So I wasn't really sure what this was. I did not have the other symptoms. I had some difficulty breathing, but I did not have any dry cough at that time. So I think I was ill for at least 10 days. And then at the beginning of April, I decided to go take a test. Right. Some of my friends told me that they'd rather not go to the testing center because they were worried that they might contract something there. They didn't have it, or the government, the hospital might not be, might not be friendly, or there might be mismanagement. Right. But by the time of by the time it was 1st April, I really wanted to go and check. Right. And my family back home was also insisting that if I'm ill, then I must get tested so that I can get early treatment. So I went there, and to my pleasant surprise, it was a very nice experience. In fact, there was a filtering interview. Pre-interview, they had asked me they were screening patients for symptoms, so they asked me some questions. All the doctors were wearing full PPE and gear, and they asked me questions about my symptoms. And when I explained the fact about breathing difficulties, they were very empathetic and allowed me to go in to take the test. Right. And the testing process took around 20 minutes. I had to wait for 15 minutes inside, and then in 5 minutes they took the swabs, asked me questions, and they said that if I test positive, they would call me within 24 to 48 hours. Right. Yes, and then I went back home.
Right, but it's luckily you didn't have they didn't reply you. That means it should be a negative.
Yes, so 2 days, I was a bit anxious. I waited for it.
Yeah.
By that time, it was already 13 days or so, 12 or 13 days, and the symptoms had been easing. So I was a bit anxious, and I was waiting for their call, but they did not call. So I called up their hotline, and they said that if we haven't called you back, it means that you tested negative. You should assume that you tested negative.
Right. So I think this is. I will go back to some standard questions that I ask almost everyone in every week. So, what is the biggest changes in the so-called only as you observe that in the Cambodia society in general, their daily habits? What is the biggest change between before the pandemic and after the pandemic?
Biggest change.
Yeah.
In the initial period, I think there was some you could sense a number of shop owners were concerned when a foreigner would enter their shop.
Oh.
And I think this lasted for around a month or so. So you could sense a bit of apprehension in their voice and in their behavior in the first month. But after that, things have gone back to normal everywhere. You see how there are many buildings that have initiated cleanliness, hygiene protocols. They're cleaning their elevators and their door handles everywhere, and temperature checks in so many office buildings and shops and stores. So that is one thing that has changed. The cinemas have closed down. Closed down for a while, only recently opened up again, but they are also they're also taking some precautions in the sense that they're checking temperature, and then they're only allowing 2 people to sit together. Everyone else, has to social distance. So there is a gap of at least 2 meters, 1 to 1.5 meters between cinema goers.
Right.
Yeah.
And I need to fill in a question here because I'm not sure you know this information, but at least from my observation and from my talk with you, and then a little research is Cambodia is relatively calm, or Cambodians are relatively calm to dealing with the pandemic because they also affected by the SARS pandemic before. So do you think, is it really related? People are really rather calm to feel, because they have done this before, or maybe for some people it's a distant past. So at least they have done this before, so they can dealing with the situation.
So Cambodia went through the SARS.
Yeah.
But as far as I can recall, there were no fatalities.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I think the calm that exists right now is likely due to the fact that there have been no deaths reported as a result of coronavirus. That's one thing. The other thing is that the low number of cases as well. Are Cambodians calmer than their neighbors? I can't say for sure, but I think the real test would be when the number of cases goes up exponentially. So that's when we will have a real test of whether Cambodians are inherently disciplined, that they can stay calm and not panic.
And this last question is I probably need to get back to the early days you heard about the news, because in many countries, like especially like places in Hong Kong and Singapore, when the pandemic comes and everybody is rushed to the supermarket to get anything they can get like the toilet papers and all kinds of weird stuff. And I think you'll probably hear from the world news during that time of period. Is there anything that similar happened in Cambodia, or everything is people are just calm?
In the beginning, there were people posting on Facebook, especially expatriates, about going to the going to the supermarket and stocking up. There were I know some Cambodian friends who stocked up grain, like rice, in their house. And then they started, once they realized it's not going to affect the food supply.
Yeah.
They started selling the stuff they had been holding.
They start selling the stuff. Okay.
Yes.
That's interesting because in Hong Kong it was quite a mess because I'm not sure it's because it really the supply chain from China has broke down. So that is some cases, but still I don't know why people are so afraid about the rice because the rice are coming from Thailand in Hong Kong and it's steady. So that is the situation. It's quite interesting talking about because I don't think Cambodia is something usually on our radar. So I found this case is quite interesting. Even talk with you today if we talked to you before. So yeah. So so far this is just a little bit observation or possibility because you think there's possibility in Cambodia that might have a surge in the because everyone is talking about in the northern hemisphere the winter will be another wave is coming up. So you think Cambodia is it well prepared or just not sure how it's going on, the situation?
Well, is Cambodia well prepared for a pandemic? Well, I mean, a bit of research on Cambodia's healthcare system would reveal that the country is actually quite backward when it comes to healthcare facilities. It is not as strong in this space as Thailand and Vietnam. From what I've heard, and this is unverified, that there are around 70 to 75 ventilators.
Okay.
In the country, and that's a very low number. And in the initial phase, it was a little concerning that the number of ventilators is so low. But I think the fact that the population here is very young is sort of a silver lining.
Yeah.
Because that would help slow down the spread of COVID-19 if there is a second wave in the region.
So I think it's probably, I don't know, because it on the other hand is probably that this is just guessing on by the sense we learn from. I see so many news. I would say for myself it's an educational guess because the population is so young. It probably something that people like Boris Johnson or his advisor so dream of, the so-called herd immunity. It's probably happening in Cambodia.
It is a possibility.
Yeah, it is a possibility. I can't tell. So yeah. So thank you today. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So nice talking to you.
Yeah, it's nice to talking to you because it's really hard to find information from my usual reach. So that's a very valuable chance. So next time we probably talk about somewhere else. So stay tuned. 各位聽眾，如果你聽到呢度咧，你都好犀利㗎啦，因為你已經頂咗咧大概10幾分鐘嘅我嘅好頂唔順嘅呢一個廣東式嘅英文啦，同埋10幾分鐘嘅呢個印度式英文嘅。因為今日咧我哋請嚟嘅嘉賓咧係一位喺柬埔寨嘅呢一個 expat 啦，佢叫 Anirudh 啦。咁其實咧佢就喺當地嘅 IT 界咧就做咗好多年㗎啦，喺柬埔寨咁就即係爆多啲就佢喺當地已經有佢嘅女朋友啦。咁所以其實就柬埔寨其實大家會我by default都會覺得佢哋係會隱瞞疫情嘅，即係尤其佢嘅首相洪森做咗咁多年啦，咁大家都即係聽佢名都好耐啦，即係90幾年做到而家，咁跟住又同中國共產黨嘅關係、契丹共產黨嘅關係咁好啦，咁即係佢哋同契丹共產黨關係，即係包括皇室都同契丹共產黨關係非常之良好，咁大家 by default 咧就會覺得柬埔寨咧就會隱瞞疫情嘅，咁當然我哋嘅 expat 就會覺得咁我唔知係一個 bias 定係當地有當地嘅 information 佢嘅 insight 啦。其實咧就佢覺得如果要隱瞞疫情隱唔到嘅，因為即係柬埔寨啲咁醫療落後嘅地方咧，要死人咧就一對應就全世界都知嘅，咁所以就 必定係會傳出嚟嘅。咁所以佢嘅見解咧就係、有機會就第一就柬埔寨真係天氣熱啦，咁但係你覺得新加坡咁嘅環境係咪已經否決咗呢一個咁嘅理論咧？我唔知啦。咁而佢一個比較有趣嘅理論咧，就係因為柬埔寨呢個國家咧，其實係而家個人口係非常之後生嘅，呢個先係重點。因為即係老人家咧，就喺呢個赤柬年代，因為其實計翻個年代都係嘅，即係你赤柬柬埔寨內戰咁多年，當年最勇嘅兵咪而家咪啱好係啲五六十歲嘅廢佬咯。咁所以其實而家啲廢佬，其實調翻轉頭到而家，即係當然。歐美都好多話好後生啫，Let it be Corona 就 Corona 咁樣中晒招咁，有後生嘅絕對有嘅，即係繼續要 rave party 嗰啲。咁但係其實個 point 係柬埔寨係好多人係好後，即係而家係大部分人因為人口後生，所以佢哋變咗咧就冇，即係佢哋即係感染力，即係可能感染咗冇事啦。即係 Boris Johnson 好中意講嘅 herd immunity 啦，即係或者大家覺得佢好中意講嗰樣嘢啦，係啊。咁但係另外一樣嘢就係因為咁，其實佢哋嘅人口嘅抵抗能力比較強，所以佢哋嘅 case 比較少，或者發出嘅發病嘅機率比較少，咁所以有機會係咁樣。咁所以其實係一個幾有趣嘅 input 嚟嘅。咁所以其實即係我哋就係其實就做下呢啲嘢，有陣時就發掘下呢啲平時大家唔會去睇嘅嘢。咁當然我哋就唔會嗌你下下關心柬埔寨嘢，即係我哋唔需要佢關心黎巴嫩係咪？咁但係其實即係希望大家可以每一次 tune 每個月去每個禮拜 tune in 都聽到啲新嘢啦，係啊，就咁啦嚇。咁下一次其實可以預告下嘅，我睇下錄唔錄到，但係令大家好難受嘅英文嘅一個，因為應該係法國口音嚟嘅。咁下個禮拜見啦〜